Hello, Jay. Today we have a very cool episode. I'm here with Jay, and first of all, welcome to the One Podcast. I think we're still in season 2, and doing quite a lot of interesting episodes. Today we have one about Eco Protocol, which is a stablecoin infra project. But yeah, we'll let Jay dive into what exactly Eco is. And yeah, I'm not as well versed in the stablecoin ecosystem, so very keen to learn a bit more. Without further ado, we have Jay, who is CMO at Eco Protocol. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. I think it would be great to start with a brief intro, mainly from your side. What were you doing before? We've known each other for a while, but I'll let you go over it. And also if you can give us a brief TLDR on Eco to start with.
I was actually thinking as you were drumming up the intro, I was like, have I been on this before? I definitely have done something Chorus One related, but I can't remember if it was like a Spaces or not. But excited to kind of change the mask a little bit, not so much in the red triangle land, which I still love, but a little bit different with Eco now. So quickly on myself, I've been a marketing leader in crypto blockchain industry since 2015. I started in the industry on the ad agency side. Focused on consultancy, both on the tech and fintech side, but also the crypto side. As you can imagine, that was quite early at the time. Marketing really pertained to either Bitcoin related infrastructure, or altcoins as a category. Since then, we've obviously matured much more than that. And there's so many different subcategories within the industry. After that, I was working at a DEX called AirSwap. We were in the Ethereum space. So it's really started to get my feet wet with a lot of the smart contracts work, how to actually market from an ecosystem perspective, and then everything else that comes nicely packaged in the permissionless side, which is, I think, a never-ending challenge, which is awesome. And then really got even deeper, I would say, in the L1 side with Avalanche, leading marketing there for 4 years. That's, I believe, how we got connected. And we worked closely together because Chorus One was a great infra partner for Avalanche and its nodes. And I know for staking as well, that was really cool. And I know we were working on a lot of that, just trying to figure out how do we actually break through that ceiling. And luckily the ceiling, I think, kept getting broken, but we kept lifting it higher. And I think that's a challenge of marketing, community, BD. There's all these components in that. And so amazing learning process. Now Q Eco, I joined this team back in June this past summer, so not so long ago. And we're targeting stablecoin infrastructure, like you said, but more broadly speaking, we're trying to make it much easier and faster for any developer who's building an application on chain to be able to bring stablecoins on their application, into their application. This idea that we believe stablecoins are likely going to be the number one, or at least top focused asset for maybe the rest of time. It basically is a dollar on chain. And if you think about how dollars or any other currency functions in the world, it is essential for the health and the sustainability and growth of each local economy. And so if you think about a much more efficient money system, or much more efficient stabilized currency, well, you can actually open up a lot of more doors. But again, like going back to the problem statement, crypto still has a UX problem, generally speaking. And one of the UX problems is, how do you actually bring that stablecoin on chain? Whether that's because of issues with protocol gas tokens, you need to go get that. Why is it that Tether, USDC, other major stablecoins are seen as different assets when in fact they're actually representing the same underlying asset effectively, or same one-to-one asset? Other examples would be really just using the stablecoin as the gas token. This idea of bank accounts, I tend to lean towards. It's like when you wire money or you send and transfer money across fintech platforms, you don't need to get another asset to pay for that transaction fee. You can just use your balance and pay that balance or pay that transaction fee very quickly. So all in all, that's the first and foremost focus. There's much more to that, but for now, that is like the job to be done. Once we figure out, hey, these are the applications that are most interested in this use case, but then also these are the types of applications that need this type of solution as best or as quickly as possible. They need it yesterday. Then we can actually work with these customers and these applications to figure out how to expand that use case. And I think that's the classic startup validation. Let's actually find product market fit, or at least a strong sense of that, and then start to kind of explore and conquer that territory as best as possible. So at the end of the day, we're payments experts, we're stablecoin infrastructure experts. We're excited to see what this protocol does. And that's really what the first and foremost focus will be for the Eco Protocol.
Fantastic. Yeah, I think that's already quite a lot to unwrap. And maybe like, even for me and for the listeners, it would be great if you could provide like an overview of the stablecoin market. Like it's, I think, pretty broad. There's different types of stablecoins, and actually quite a hot topic with the recent like Stripe and I think Bridge deal that happened. So yeah, I think it's perfect timing as well for the podcast. And yeah, it would be great if you could enlighten us with that map to start with.
Yeah. Right now, stablecoins, you have like the leaders, Tether, USDC, and you have other algorithmic stablecoins. What had happened in the last since probably like 2015 is you had people start to issue stablecoins and have preferences and opinions on how best to stabilize that coin effectively, right? There's, again, like algorithmic, you have asset-backed, you have probably a combination of the two. There's probably other ideas that are coming to the market. And so I describe this as kind of the issuance phase. You have issuance of currencies in human history where you have like the renminbi or the US dollar. Those currencies were issued because one of the biggest problems that existed in both early stages of the countries effectively or regions had fragmented systems. So pick the US, for example. You had a bunch of colonies that were using all types of currencies. The dominant currencies, I think, were the Portuguese and Spanish currencies. And so that was kind of mixed in it. The English currency was also mixed in there. Then all of a sudden, all these colonies started to create local currencies. So you're seeing the same exact story written, just not on chain and a probably much more primitive angle. And then someone or a group of people came in and said, this is not efficient. This is not probably healthy for an economy to grow and scale. We need to actually standardize this model. And so they introduced the US dollar. It's obviously a much more simplified version of that, but you can actually see that written across time. You can see that even if you go way farther back with how humans used to transact and report the accounting. They used to use stone tablets and etch it on a stone tablet. Obviously, it's not portable. It's also, people can probably commit fraud by erasing it. I don't know, stealing the stones. I have no idea what could have been done. But you can see that the security was also an issue. So over centuries of innovation, you're seeing obviously different types of improvements because the tech lifts the floor up, but you're seeing the same type of thinking. And so we've been in this issuance phase. And then now you're seeing the acceleration of, okay, we've now passed the issuance, or we're in a good place where there's plenty of assets available, or the solution has started to kind of like hit its ceiling. But then you look around and you're saying, what else can be improved? It's the infrastructure. And you can also see that with the US dollar, again, kind of like extrapolating a little bit. But if you pick that same analogy, the US dollar was used with, was transferred with actual paper money. It was actually cash, right? And then now, if you think about how it works, it's still not most efficient, but the infrastructure is much more digitized. You have interoperability, I don't want to say protocols, but companies like Swift that enables the interoperability between banks, for example, or makes it a little bit easier. And then blockchain obviously is the punchline to where we're at now. So I think, again, like we're in this age of infrastructure. That's why Stripe with the Bridge acquisition announcement, you have a lot of different players coming through saying, hey, we can actually be this infrastructure because of, I think, this natural course of history that tends to repeat itself.
Yeah. Yeah, that's That's very like insightful history on it, and then maybe like in terms of where does Eco sit today? Like, can you collaborate with all of these different stablecoins? Are you like more of the rails for developers to access them, or how would you guys position yourselves?
We're a little bit of both. I would say we're still trying to understand as a team how best to like have double the confidence in our positioning and again, who the exact like priority target segment is. But I mean, if you talk about those two segments, right? So let's focus on developers for a second. Developers care about a few things. They care about making sure that their apps, or at least broadly speaking, they care about their application succeeding. What does that mean? Well, or how do you get there? You might want to increase the total addressable market so you can actually acquire more customers. You might also want to make the user experience as streamlined as possible. So then you actually don't have, I'm using kind of more of a marketing term, but like a bounce rate where people kind of come to your application, can't use the thing, and then they leave and they never interact ever again, which probably happens more often than not in crypto, right? I think Absolutely. The third thing that I think of is probably third for a reason. It's like capital efficiency and just efficiency of the system as a whole. At the end of the day, like I think, you know, these systems have gotten pretty efficient. So some people like don't really care too much about even like a percentage point of their whole principal funds being taken away as a fee. I think crypto has proven that fees are maybe at this stage less important. But I think they're still important nonetheless to the broader audience. And if you encapsulate that whole thing, Eco actually focuses on making sure that we address all those things in that order. So right now, again, like as I mentioned a little bit earlier, if you want to bring stablecoins on chain, you have to go through a multitude of different steps. If you're a user, if you're an application, you also have to have a multitude of different steps. You have to bootstrap liquidity. You have to figure out how the market makers might work if it's a complex system. You have to make sure that there's chain compatibility if it's cross networks. We kind of bundle all that into this one solution that says, hey, no matter in a long-term vision, no matter what network you're on or no matter what stablecoin you have, you should be able to use any application you want. And Eco sits in the middle like a Plaid would or any other middleware. Technically speaking, if we do this right, no one really needs to know that Eco exists. It seems to be more of a B2B play, in my opinion, at least as it stands now. And really, at the end of the day, what is the hell yes win on that outcome is you have applications now all of a sudden have a ton of growth with users because you now open up the floodgates for those use cases because it's just simply easy to use. So that's like the developer side. And then on the stablecoin side, we've thought about this a lot internally, but you could also have as many stablecoins issue on this network. Perhaps you're like a new stablecoin and you want to compete with the big guys, for example. You might actually want to issue through this liquidity network and provide incentives on chain that way. And so people, you know, maybe the incentives focus on users transact with or applications, make sure that the base asset that they accept is this new stablecoin, but anyone can come in with any other stablecoin to use that. So you still have that. You still have your asset being used through the flow of that application. So that's like one idea that we've been talking about on the stablecoin side.
Yeah, that like I could see that working, especially as you mentioned for new projects and on the previous point. Yeah, even like personally, I would say 95% of the times I try to use a new application, I end up not using it because the onboarding is just too messy. So yeah, absolutely needed. So it's great to hear. Maybe next to understand a bit further how Eco works. I know you guys are still early and in development, and some things are not disclosed yet. But if you could guide us a bit through kind of the architecture of Eco. I know you are potentially a roll-up. There's also this liquidity network and also like a cross-chain transaction system. So yeah, maybe one by one, we can start with the roll-up or whatever you prefer. But yeah, it would be great to understand the architecture a bit more.
I'll give you a high level overview of all the components, and then I'll kind of give you a little bit of like what each mean, hopefully in a easily understood manner. But so we have this holistic eco protocol. There's basically, I want to call like the transfer system that you kind of alluded to. I want to call that a framework for now. We're actually considering like different names, but it's just a framework, and that's at the bottom of the stack. That's at like the bare bones. This framework has basically two options, and potentially in the future, maybe even more, to provide flexibility for what path apps want to choose based on what fits their need most. So there is this kind of, again, flexibility in the system. So the first path is making sure that we can actually transfer assets without adding new trust assumptions into that architecture. So what I mean by that is when you actually have interoperability right now, a lot of these solutions lean on messaging protocols, oracles, kind of like additional, I guess, like intermediaries, so to speak, to make sure that you can actually prove that these transactions go through, like, and make sure that you can validate that, right? And so our team created a solution, and we released it to the public. It's called Cross L2 Actions. It was a response to a request 7755, which is kind of getting a little bit popular in the optimism in base ecosystems or the developer ecosystems. Okay. And this way you can actually transfer stablecoins across any rollup. But for our use case right now, we're focusing on optimism and base without added trust assumptions. So from a security perspective, this might be a preference for a lot of developers because you don't actually have any more trust assumptions that you have to kind of go through the diligence process and rely on that. It's just a very simple path forward. There's another path where we're currently building this with TBD on which messaging protocol, but we're trying to figure out actually a faster, more, just a faster, more streamlined path for people that actually prefer the speed and may not necessarily need that most trusted or like trust minimized path forward. So it's basically like slightly slower and one's just faster. And then just there's different ways that the transactions get secured on chain. And so that's in the base level framework. And this you can view as kind of like an integration. We're likely going to build an SDK just for the simplicity of integration, and any application on theoretically any Ethereum rollup that is compatible with Eco Protocol can actually integrate this much more easily. Now, this framework then sits within the rollup in the long-term vision, where if we believe that there might be a more, I guess, like app chain thesis, kind of bringing back my Avalanche bias for a second. If we believe that the world is going to be full of app chains, well, then it might make sense for certain use cases to sit on these app chains because they can actually be much more optimized. You can have customizability all the way down to the settlement layer. You have just much more flexibility, and you can actually build into what perhaps the entire ecosystem wants. And so I think you're seeing that trend a lot. You have a lot of these app protocols saying, hey, we're going to have an SDK API, some sort of modular stack that can easily be integrated. And you don't have to leave your settlement layer ecosystem. You don't have to leave base. You don't have to leave Optimism. You can just kind of stick around. You can also integrate this. But there's also people that are saying, hey, we actually prefer that trade-off because we want the performance improvements that the rollups able to bring for us versus conforming to this permissionless protocol that they might be on currently. So that's where we're at now with the whole system. In the middle, you have a fillers, sometimes called solvers. It's like a market making network. Okay. And so that's really where the stable coins sit. And you basically have market makers listening on both the destination and the source and the destination chains and saying, okay, like Bob wants to trade USDC and USDT or use USDT and USDC for using Blackbird, and they want to use $100 worth of it. And it doesn't matter, again, like those two are just examples, but if you have multiple, more than that, it doesn't matter what stable coins you use. You can actually just come to the application. It doesn't matter what network you're on. The application can choose to only accept, let's say, USDC on base, and you have a one transaction fee, one action experience there as a user. And you don't actually see all the complex stuff I just jumbled over for like the last 2 minutes.
Okay. Yeah. So And then like the rollup is also still like TBD, or would this like sit also in between like Optimism and Base, for example?
The rollup is probably TBD on like details, but it is in like the public roadmap to try and bring that to market sometime within the next year, I believe. And so I think depending on which ecosystem makes most sense to go tackle first, I think that'll determine who's actually publicly part of this go-to-market strategy. Longer term, you could theoretically, or rather, this is more for like the SDK, but with the rollup, you can actually start to like tackle different use cases. I don't necessarily think we have an opinion privately even on which ecosystem is best, just because things change so much in our industry. But we do know that there is flexibility within the Ethereum ecosystem as a whole, because a lot of what we've been doing is building with mainnet in our focus, and then its scalability layers as well. This idea that it's fragmented, although most users don't care about the fragmentation, they just care about easy use cases, easy user experiences. Yeah, okay, that makes sense. And it sounds like you're also vouching for the app chain thesis like us. So that's great to hear. I think we're too biased at this point.
Yeah, exactly. Hopefully. And also like maybe lastly on that, the SDK or cross-chain transaction system or framework that sits like on the bottom, is that open source for any builder to come in and use the like in their app or even their chain?
Yeah, so the crossed L2 actions, which was kind of like the 0.5 of the one release, basically, that's open source. That was the first effort that we've open sourced, I think, as a team, or at least in recent time as a team. We're focused on an open sourced way of development. And so the full Eco Protocol spec isn't out yet, but that's our intention. So as we start to release it out, you'll start to see just our repos being open sourced. And we'll see how people react to that. But I feel like just making massive assumptions on just like the open source community, people tend to like that type of approach, especially if it's something that is of need. And so we're pretty confident with that approach. Admittedly, though, right, like most people are nervous, like opening up everything that they're doing. And I'm not even in the trenches building this thing. So I can't even really speak on behalf of the engine product teams. But I'm excited because I think it's, from a go-to-market and community building perspective, I have a lot more freedom to build that developer ecosystem and really kind of practice what we preach in the on-chain world, which is like, hey, we focus on transparency. We focus on like building alongside you. I tend to find sometimes in crypto, even though you say that, you don't actually do that, which I think is oftentimes a little silly. But it just happens naturally, right? And so it's going to be cool to be able to like really wear that on our sleeves. And perhaps that actually might be a reason for people to give us a chance a little bit more than maybe our competitors or the solutions that are competing with the Eco Protocol, simply because of that fact alone. But we'll see what happens. In the coming months, we're planning to start to have a phased rollout of our V1 Eco Protocol. And then I think like towards the end of Q1, perhaps early Q2 as well, is when we aim to try to release the whole thing on mainnet. But yeah, TBD on exactly those details. That's our aspiration for now. And we're pretty confident that we can actually meet that.
Awesome. Yeah. Sounds very exciting. And maybe lastly on the, like just building this whole ecosystem, this whole stack. I think in your talks, you mentioned also that you're highly opinionated. So yeah, I was curious about like the design choices of making not only like the tech stack, but also the ecosystem. If there's some trade-offs that you have to do to make and why.
The highly opinionated part, I think, comes from how we actually came to realizing the Eco Protocol was likely necessary. And it actually comes in a very roundabout way. But just to like condense the story a little bit, We have another solution within our team called Bend. It was formerly called Beam. It's basically on-chain Venmo, but just a very like stripped down version, just because it only supports Optimism and Base and a few stable coins. But in a long term, it could theoretically support, again, like any other network, and also many more stable coins if there was liquidity to support that. So you can kind of see how this starts to sound very familiar to the Eco Protocol. It was because we set out to build a very simple payments app, so to speak, that anyone can use to use stablecoins. Why? Again, going way back a year or two ago, before we even ventured out to focus on the Eco Protocol, one of the biggest pain points internally was, how come no one's using stablecoins? They're using it to hold them, but they're not really using them. They're not transacting with them, at least en masse. There might be, emerging markets that might be using them and whatnot, but it's not being used like you would use a Venmo or Cash App or whatever else, right? And one of the main areas that I think most people can agree on is UX. And so when we started to build the UX out, and we were saying, hey, how do we make it so you can use any stablecoin and use it from any network and no one has any idea? Well, when we looked internally on the infrastructure side, there weren't any solutions to integrate to actually make this happen. So it actually became more of like a wish list than actually something that could be done in reality. And so the team kind of worked internally and figured out some like ways to hack at the problem and came up with some certain solutions. And this is where the Eco Protocol was birthed out of. And so you now have, for the last year or so, we've been using Bend to validate these choices. We've seen customer use cases. We've tried different customer use cases. We've focused on merchants.
Nice.
We focused on peer-to-peer. We focused on kind of everything else in between, and got that feedback. For the most part, it kind of validated a lot of the early thinking we had. But then we also then focused less on the consumer side and more on the business side, more on the application side. And that also obviously opens up a floodgate to a totally different new set of questions and answers. And I think that's when the highly opinionated comes into place, because now you go, okay, well, we have a lot of really good signals and people care about security, but do they really care about security when push comes to shove? And so then we were like, okay, well, maybe some other companies say they care about security, but really all they care about is use of like high confidence in the security, like high enough confidence. And then user experience is really what takes priority over anything else. Because why? If they have a ton of users come in because they made a change on the user experience, well, then they're not going to really care that it's like the most bulletproof secure design that I think our industry, especially the technical side, gets a little bit tripped up into. I'm not saying security is not important, right? I think it's very, very important, but I think it's not important enough to the point where for a lot of the industry's early innings, it was really about 0 or 1. If it wasn't to a 0 amount of security where it was an impenetrable, audited a million times, which also I know people have opinions that doesn't really mean much, right? It just like kind of like checks in a sense, then it shouldn't be out in production, right? And I think people have realized that with decentralization, they've realized that with security, they realized with a lot of different things. And so I think a lot of the internal choices was kind of a product of our own like heads and thinking that kind of led to these design decisions. So now we were thinking, okay, well, let's take the fork in the road, but also let's actually focus on 2 design choices and just let kind of the market of our prospective customers or the prospective apps make the choice. And at the end of the day, we're not going to find out until we release it. And so now we go for, hey, let's actually focus on distribution. Let's actually focus on getting these applications on the Eco Protocol. And then let's see what happens, right? Like, let's see if there's user opinions that really matter when it's in production. Let's see if applications actually have really strong opinions. And that's really where I think part of the conversations from the developer community, like the RIP 7755, kind of gave us that push to want to actually put that out and be like, oh, okay, well, that's validating. Let's actually put one like no trust assumptions added approach. And that's a way that we actually can focus on. And then the other side is let's actually see if we can also create a fast approach with the messaging protocol. There's probably other like opinionated things that the developers and product people have argued for hours that they could probably highlight too when they actually bring that up. But that's kind of like the encapsulating way I see some of the choices that we've made, less about the trade-offs so much, or I guess high level trade-offs and seeing what happens.
Yeah, no, that's very clear, and also like I guess it can evolve with time quite a lot. So who knows? But also definitely agree on your point on security versus UX. I think we've seen quite a lot of examples this cycle with like something like restaking, where you have a lot of security, but questionable amount of users. So yeah, absolutely. I think that's a very interesting point. Maybe next on going into the nitty gritty of how can devs benefit from Eco? Maybe touch upon the main challenges that devs have today when integrating or wanting to integrate something like a stablecoin. And how does Eco solve that in practice, and also like for the user side of things, if any, would be great to deep dive a bit more.
Right now, when you segment the industry, there's so many, like I said before, there's so many segments. Everyone can agree on that. I think there's like this subsection of DeFi, which is like the DEXs and kind of like the trade focused solutions. They might, have this stablecoin liquidity or token liquidity problem solved to a good enough degree. But even then, like you can pick that as an example and you can focus on, well, maybe if you're a new DEX that has a much more efficient way of trading tokens and you're going from 0 to 1, well, it might actually help for you to have a stablecoin liquidity layer just as another way to diversify your offering. And you're seeing that like MetaMask swaps is a perfect example. MetaMask swaps started with, that's also shout out to my old team because they were actually my old team 2 companies ago. But they focused on a DEX first and foremost. How do we actually bring trade into the wallet, right? This was like kind of during the ICO time in 2017, 18. And then they were like, okay, well, let's actually focus on the aggregators as a whole. 1inch, I think Matches existed. There's a bunch of other solutions that existed, but they were saying, okay, well, let's actually play that game as well. And maybe we can actually have the distribution problem more solved because so many people use MetaMask. They might simply, out of convenience, use MetaMask swaps, even if it charges, I don't know how they charge these days, but it was like 80 bips at one point. And so even if they charge that, they don't care about the better pricing and other venues. And then they're like, okay, well, now you have bridging solutions because now it's not just ETH. And all of a sudden you had EVMs explode in the last 4 or 5 years, EVM L1s explode. And then they were like, well, let's just add bridging. And so you have this morphing of this product grow with the times of the industry. And you could argue that, yeah, MetaMask is a market leader and they had a market aggregator, DEX aggregator, and also DEX aggregators were already abundant, I would argue. But even then, the total addressable market kept growing, and so they needed to keep up with that. And so we also believe that this is kind of the meme, right? But we're still early. But because of that, there's so many more opportunities, and there's also so many things that could go either way. So there's this theme of optionality, I think. And so if you're a MetaMask, even they might say, hey, like, we also realize that our stablecoin to stablecoin transfers could be more efficient in certain pairs, maybe. Or maybe we don't support some of the new and up and coming ones, and Eco Protocol actually has a good enough layer of up and coming stablecoins. They want to integrate that. And so there's some low hanging options as like a whole, I think, is as one example. I think the other side could be more like this like consumer app narrative, this like more like mass market application that hopes to just like hide the blockchain completely, hide the infrastructure completely. And they're saying, okay, well, if you're looking at Coinbase, and I know this is more like anecdotal, but I think this is probably like something most people can agree on. Coinbase is a perfect example. They have USDC. They're tripling down, quadrupling down on USDC. So what does that mean? When you go from cash, fiat to crypto, the first thing they ask is, do you want to, at least as an American customer, do you want to swap your USDC to USDC? Back in the day, it was USD to BTC or USD to ETH probably. It wasn't to USDC. And so now you have all these massive players focusing on stablecoins as the first step to your on-chain journey. But like we said before, it's actually not the best right now because you can't do anything past that easily, right? And so like think of like Blackbirds or like these, again, like mass market applications. They might say, hey, we actually want a lot of people on chain. And for the most part, they're going to have USDC because that's just going to be denominated as USD. And that's going to be a really easy way to onboard people. Because like with any like non-on-chain, off-chain application, like traditional application, you can just buy with US dollar, right? Like you have a social media account and you want to fund that, you buy it with US dollar or whatever euros or whatever your local currency is. And so I think those are like the two areas that we're seeing. I think last thing I'll add is leaning more towards the developer side. I think I touched on this in the beginning, but really we have high conviction on our focus. There are actually a lot of interoperability solutions out there. And I don't mean that to say that they're a lot like Eco, but they're just a lot, right? There's messaging protocols, there are bridges, there are kind of like a merging of the two where you have like cross-chain aggregator, you have liquidity routing where people are saying, well, we're not necessarily simplifying the transaction flow, but we're just taking like point A, B, C, D, E, all the way to Z, and we're just going to batch that into one. So you still like take on a lot of transaction fees and your principal gets kind of drawn down quite significantly, but at least it's easy, right? And we think on our team, that's like a stopgap for the current state of the industry, but not the best solution for the long term. You always want most reasonably, most people just want the fastest path forward and the easiest and the cheapest way forward. And that usually triumphs at the end of the day. So I think we're just really focusing on that middleware component. And then also that very specific use case of bringing stablecoins on chain or to on-chain apps rather. Yeah.
Okay. That's, definitely a lot on how you guys can offer different things to different types of applications or devs. I think that's very exciting. And also, I wanted to ask on why you think is this middleware approach better than creating your stablecoin, essentially.
I think, that's actually a really good question. The stablecoin side, I don't think one is better than the other. Maybe what I was about to say is like one might be easier than the other. And I think creating a stablecoin is much harder, at least with my like arm's distance view of it. Some things that I think could involve stablecoins, right? You got a cold start problem. You got to figure out the issuance model. You got to figure out the incentivization model if there is one. You got to now beat the Goliaths of the world. There is USDC, Tether. There's a bunch more, even like DAI or whatever it's called now, but DAI, for example. And so I think the market's just much more mature. I think I'm speaking on behalf of kind of US residences because I am one, like regulation is getting much more tight. I think that's something that's always looming. Infrastructure, I think also isn't necessarily like clear from that by any means, but I think stablecoin is just like much more topical. I think, you see Congress and the government talking about stablecoins, but I've never heard the term stablecoin infrastructure. I think that's like 5 years out from now. Maybe the bridge acquisition starts to like bring that up on the floor, perhaps. And then I think on the infrastructure side, that also ties into our company's history. One thing I didn't necessarily mention, and then if people look up Eco online, they'll probably find this, is Eco's actually been around for 4 or 5 years. We were doing a bunch of things, trying to create the Eco currency, trying to create an Eco app. Won't get too much into that, but basically sunsetted those efforts. But at the end of the day, what did that mean? This team has been relentlessly working on payment solutions and on-chain money solutions. And so we believe that we are on-chain money experts. And then I think more towards the infrastructure side, because we've really been getting more on the infrastructure side and the solution side rather than like the actual asset, aside from the money, the eco currency, of course. But I think that history is also very important to highlight, just because our head's been in that game for 4 or 5 years. And then even like, I'm pretty new, like I said to the team, I've joined in the summer. And even on the Avalanche side, like if you're naturally close to on-chain apps, or even you guys on Chorus One, stablecoins have always been like a prominent part of your just worldview, right? And so I think that's again, like kind of the history lesson also that I highlighted before. I think that was also interesting. Also, the other plug there is the reason why I know so much about history is because I was writing about it recently, and I hopefully will publish that. But I was like, this is actually really interesting. History tends to repeat itself over and over and over and over. And that's really cool to look at just generally.
Yeah, no, very, very cool to see. And also you're a fantastic writer. So excited to check out the next post. But yeah, mainly because of time, just to wrap up, I think, so we talked a bit about like the past, and also good to know that Eco has been around for a while. Maybe let's finish with, if successful, where does Eco stand? What will be the role of Eco in this cross-chain world? And also, like, maybe are you envisioning to compete with industry giants like Tether, Circle, or just you see a future where everyone does their thing?
I think right now, so the first part is success on Eco. What success looks like in a year is we have integrations with a really good, solid base of applications. Hopefully, like applications, like, harnessing kind of like the startup, I guess, like playbook that often gets said a lot about acquiring your first 100 super fans. Who are those first 100 super fans that are actually going to integrate Eco? Number one. I think number two, it would be really cool if the user base somehow, right? Like, I use the Plaid example a lot. People like Plaid doesn't, market like crypto companies where they tell everybody Plaid's amazing, but you kind of know what Plaid is, but you also don't know really what it is. That's kind of like a nice middle ground, because you open it up and you kind of know that it gets access to your major bank account, but you don't really know how it does it. Neither should you really care. And so I think we got to figure out a fine line of how to do that on chain as best as possible. Like maybe it's just as simple as something like a modal that pops up, or maybe it's something like powered by Eco, who knows? But in any sense, like I think once we get the application mind share and we're in that's like a big layer of success. It'd be nice to have the icing on the cake, which is you now have a user base that kind of demands it. The user base saying, hey, like, it is so frustrating to use your application because I have to still do the old time thing where I have to go all around to make sure that I have gas token, all those things we talked about to get on chain to get onto your application, when in fact, I just rather just, use this plugin that I'm used to, and perhaps that adds more business pressures to that application to want to integrate Eco. So I think that's like the year out. I think farther out really is branching out of this V1 state. What kind of other interesting use cases and user experiences can we streamline? What can we actually simplify most? It's not just this example that we've been focusing on this entire conversation. There's so many more ideas in the chamber, but we only want to pull those out once we start to validate them, because arguably they might actually compound to this idea of simplifying cross-chain actions in one kind of action effectively, right? That's kind of like the umbrella category. The brand positioning we've kind of established is accelerating how money moves on chain. How can we make that faster until it's so fast that there's no more optimization left? And I think that's our vision at Eco. I think the second component that you mentioned, which is like, where do we compete? Where do we sit? Do we actually go against the giants? Maybe. If I were to bet now, probably not as it stands, but you never know, right? Like you never know what you end up evolving into. Maybe this network becomes this like really amazing issuance platform where then we can actually build upon that by, hey, we have identified that we can actually win the stablecoin game somehow or some segment of it because we now have the issuance and the distribution platform necessary to make it to that level. There's probably other areas that are interesting as well, but I think we'll see. I think there's a lot of the sport to be played. I think still we're still in like the early parts of like the preseason. But that gets me super excited because it reminds me of Avalanche. Like I joined when the white paper was just a white paper. To think that Avalanche would get to the state now, I like can't imagine it. And I've already gone through it and I've left Avalabs. Like that to me is wild. And hopefully we can kind of repeat success again, employing what we learned from that era, but also learning from our mistakes. I think that's a really important part. And I think there's a lot to be said about time in the market. I think you can appreciate that too. Someone who's been in the industry for a while, you just like know what's good and what's bad without even having to look it up. But then you also then have better frameworks to take on some of the new things that come to the market. So then you can actually be a little bit more, you can maximize success for those like unknowns that inevitably will come your way.
Yeah. No, I think very, very, very exciting times ahead. Stablecoins is definitely one of those killer apps in crypto that people often people always are asking for killer apps in crypto and then don't think about stablecoins. And so it's definitely a very, very exciting space. So keen to follow you guys and see what's ahead for the next year. Hopefully we manage to create a few new super fans with this pod and keen to stay in touch. Thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah, thanks a lot. This was awesome.